We've just got some breaking news in from Buckingham Palace, folks. So this statement has just come in from Buckingham Palace, and I'll read it for you. It goes on to say, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles, and...
The state banquet had been designed to display unity, dignity, and royal control. Instead, one chair shattered the illusion. The moment Meghan entered the hall and lowered herself into the place reserved for Catherine, Prince William's expression changed. He did not argue. He did not appeal to the king. He pushed back his chair, looked directly across the table, and walked out while the entire room fell silent. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Buckingham Palace had prepared the evening with ruthless precision. Foreign dignitaries waited beneath royal ceremony. Senior family members followed a fixed order, and palace officials guarded a seating plan, determining exactly where each guest belonged. A state banquet was more than a formal dinner. It was a national ceremony, where placement showed rank, trust, and the future shape of the crown. Catherine's chair beside William therefore carried a message no one could misunderstand. As Princess of Wales, the title given to the wife of the heir, she was being presented as the woman expected to stand beside the future king. William reached for the back of his chair, then stopped. His fingers tightened as his eyes moved from Meghan to the folded menu before her. "That is Catherine's place," the prince said quietly. The words did not rise above the room, yet they cut through it. Meghan remained seated, but the confidence in her face began to fade as nearby conversations died. Harry looked toward his wife, then toward his brother, trapped between defending her and recognizing that William's anger had not appeared without cause. Catherine had not entered with the others because an aide had delayed her inside a private receiving chamber, a room used to greet selected guests before major ceremonies. That absence should have protected her place, not erased it. Yet the chair had been shifted several inches from its marked position, and her place card had been pushed beneath the menu. Meghan could not claim the name had never been visible. Someone had touched the setting that night. Someone had wanted the change to look official. Charles lowered his untouched glass when an equerry leaned close. An equerry was a senior royal aide trusted to carry private instructions during formal events, and this one delivered a message that stripped the color from the king's face. William would not return. He wanted one answer first. Who had authorized Meghan to sit in Catherine's seat? But before Charles could confront the person responsible, the banquet doors opened again, and Catherine finally entered the room that had just been divided in her name. Catherine arrived expecting ceremony, not betrayal. She crossed the threshold with the calm expression the palace had taught her to wear through every crisis, yet the room told her everything before anyone spoke. William's chair stood empty. Meghan occupied the place prepared for her. Harry stared down at the table, and Charles, unable to meet Catherine's eyes, seemed to understand that this was no longer a seating mistake. It was a wound inflicted in public. Catherine stopped beside the table, but she did not demand the chair back. That place carried more than her name. It publicly confirmed her position beside William during an evening meant to present the monarchy's future to foreign guests. A state occasion was an official royal event where seating, entrances, and gestures reflected rank and responsibility. Moving her from that position, therefore, sent a message far beyond the banquet hall. It suggested that the future queen could be displaced whenever peace with Harry and Meghan became more convenient than protecting her dignity. Meghan felt the room closing around her, yet she also understood what the evening meant for her. Returning to such a ceremony offered a rare chance to prove that years away had not erased her from the royal story. Catherine looked down, saw the edge of her place card beneath the folded menu, and then met the Duchess's eyes. "Were you told this was yours?" she asked. Her voice remained controlled, but the restraint made the question sharper. Meghan replied that a senior household official had escorted her directly to the seat. Irritation entered her tone when Catherine quietly asked, "Which official?" Harry finally lifted the menu and saw Catherine's initials underneath it. Shame crossed his face before he could hide it. He looked toward Meghan, then toward the empty chair where his brother should have been, and understood why William had left. She insisted that she had followed instructions and had never deliberately tried to remove Catherine. Yet her explanation weakened when she could not name the person who had supposedly approved the change. William stood in the corridor as an aide urged him to return before the delayed toast became an international embarrassment. The prince refused. He said, sitting down again would make Catherine's humiliation appear acceptable, and he would not help the palace turn disrespect into ceremony. Charles had personally approved Harry and Meghan's attendance, but the king had also ordered that the seating hierarchy, the formal order showing each royal's position, remain unchanged. Someone had ignored him, or worse, used his authority without permission. Catherine made her decision without raising her voice. She would not reclaim the chair in front of the guests. Instead, she turned away from Meghan and asked to speak privately with William, leaving the Duchess seated in a place that suddenly felt less like a victory than a trap. As Catherine followed her husband beyond the closed doors, one forgotten incident from 6 weeks earlier began to explain why William had reached his limit. The banquet walkout did not begin at the banquet. Its true beginning came 6 weeks earlier, during a private reception at Windsor Castle, when a seemingly minor change to the order of arrival exposed a far more dangerous struggle. Catherine had remained silent that evening. William had not forgotten it, and Meghan's appearance in Catherine's seat now seemed to repeat the exact insult the palace had promised would never happen again. Charles had approved Harry and Meghan's temporary return to selected royal events because he believed controlled appearances might soften the family's hostility without restoring the couple's former working status. A working royal was a family member carrying out official duties on behalf of the crown, and that role had not been returned to them. The king wanted calm, not confusion. He hoped carefully managed moments could show unity, while keeping every title, position, and responsibility exactly where it belonged. William had accepted the arrangement reluctantly. The prince agreed only after receiving a written assurance from the palace household, confirming that Catherine's ceremonial position would never be altered for publicity, private demands, or symbolic reconciliation. That promise mattered, because she was not simply his wife at these events. She represented the future of the monarchy beside him, and any public reduction of her place would suggest that her role could be traded whenever the palace needed a softer headline. The first breach came at the Windsor reconciliation reception. A formal family procession was the fixed order in which senior royals entered an official gathering, showing rank without anyone needing to explain it aloud. Catherine reached the doorway expecting to enter before Meghan, exactly as the approved order required. Then an aide raised one hand and quietly directed the Duchess forward. Meghan stepped past her. Harry followed with visible hesitation, while William watched the change happen without warning. Catherine stopped for only a second. She allowed Meghan to pass, completed the entrance, and smiled through the reception as though nothing had happened. Later, behind a closed door, she told William, "Do not create a scene for me." Yet he had already seen the hurt she was trying to hide. The future king understood that her silence had protected Charles from embarrassment, but it had also allowed whoever changed the procession to believe there would be no consequence. William confronted the king that night. He warned his father that another deliberate breach involving Catherine would force him to withdraw publicly rather than participate in manufactured unity. Charles promised it would not happen again. Meghan believed the altered order reflected the monarch's wish to treat both couples equally, but Harry privately suspected the change had been designed to create a dramatic image of his wife's return. William now unfolded the banquet note beside Catherine. The same handwritten initials appeared on both documents, linking the Windsor procession and the stolen seat to one hidden palace authority. This time, she did not ask him to stay silent. With the banquet continuing behind them, William placed the marked seating note on a table, and Catherine finally told him what she believed the palace was trying to do. There were no officials in the room when Catherine finally spoke. No cameras, no courtiers, only William, the marked seating plan, and the sound of distant music continuing beyond the wall. For years, she had survived royal conflict by refusing to let humiliation become spectacle. But this time, Catherine's restraint did not calm her husband. It confirmed his worst fear. Someone inside the palace had begun treating her silence as permission. William placed the revised note on a small table between them and asked whether she wanted him to return. The paper looked harmless, yet it carried the power to redefine her place without her consent. A seating amendment was an official change to the approved order of guests, and in royal ceremony, such a change could signal rank, trust, and authority. Catherine knew that if she quietly accepted another chair, the palace would present the evening as repaired, while the insult remained untouched. Catherine said she did not want the banquet destroyed. She understood the foreign guests were not responsible, and she knew Charles had hoped the event would prove the family could stand together again. But she would not sit elsewhere and pretend her position could be reassigned whenever reconciliation became politically useful. Her sadness had nothing to do with Meghan merely being present. The deeper wound was that someone expected her to accept a deliberate demotion, smile through it, and protect everyone else from the consequences. William looked away because anger was no longer the only emotion driving him. Guilt had settled beneath it. The prince believed his wife had absorbed years of awkward entrances, altered plans, and public discomfort to protect him and the crown. Each time she remained calm, others praised her strength. Yet that praise had slowly become an excuse to ask more of her. He told Catherine that walking back into the hall without an answer would make her silence part of the arrangement. Harry entered only after asking permission to speak without Meghan. He closed the door behind him and said his wife had been told the seat reflected a new family arrangement. The Duke explained that she believed Charles wanted a visible sign of equality between the two couples. William asked one question in return. Had his brother wondered why Catherine's name was hidden beneath the menu? Harry opened his mouth, then stopped. His silence hurt more than denial, because it showed he had noticed the warning and chosen not to challenge it. Harry finally admitted the instruction had come through Camilla's deputy private secretary. The message claimed it carried the king's personal approval, but no written order had been shown. Catherine felt the betrayal deepen. Someone had used Charles's authority, Meghan's return, and her own restraint to force a confrontation that could no longer remain private. Charles sent the summons moments later. William folded the note, Catherine steadied herself, and Harry followed them toward the smaller dining chamber, where Meghan and Camilla were already waiting. When the five of them entered the smaller chamber, Charles was already standing beside the fireplace, and Camilla was holding the original seating plan in her hands. Charles did not begin with accusation, he began with a question. Who changed the chair? The silence that followed was more dangerous than any shouted answer. On the table lay two seating plans, one approved by the king, the other carrying a handwritten amendment that appeared to bear his authority. Yet Charles knew immediately that something was wrong. He had approved Meghan's attendance, but he had never approved Catherine's removal. Charles removed his glasses and studied both pages again. Final control of state banquet seating belonged to the monarch's household, the senior palace team responsible for carrying out the king's official instructions. Small changes could pass through trusted offices, but only when direct approval had been given. Camilla's staff had requested several adjustments before the evening, hoping to reduce visible tension between Harry, Meghan, and the senior working royals. Those requests were meant to prevent embarrassment, not rearrange the future of the crown. Charles reached the handwritten amendment and stopped. A shortened version of his signature appeared beside the change, close enough to look convincing from a distance, but wrong in the details only he would notice. His hand lowered slowly. The king had seen forged authority before in old records, but never used inside his own household on a night carrying such public weight. One false mark had humiliated Catherine, driven William from the banquet, and made the monarch appear responsible for both. Camilla felt every eye move toward her. She admitted supporting a plan to place Meghan closer to the center of the table, believing physical distance from Harry's relatives would make the return look hostile. The queen consort insisted she had never ordered Catherine's name hidden or approved giving away her chair. Her voice sharpened as she defended her office, yet the original seating plan in her hands made that defense feel fragile. William refused to let the discussion shrink into family awkwardness. The prince said someone had used royal authority to diminish the future queen before foreign guests, then expected everyone to continue eating as though nothing had happened. Catherine remained calm, but her next question carried more force than anger. She asked Meghan why she stayed seated, after William clearly said whose place it was. Meghan insisted she had not seen the card before sitting. She said the escort, the position, and the confidence of the instructions made the arrangement appear official. Yet her answer weakened when Catherine reminded her that the truth became clear the moment the prince spoke. Harry looked toward his wife, but offered no defense. Camilla finally disclosed the documented account from her deputy private secretary. The official had made the final amendment after receiving a verbal message claiming Charles wanted a gesture of equality between Catherine and Meghan. No written authorization had followed. Charles turned toward the door. The equerry who carried that message was waiting outside, and he had already confessed that the order never came from the king. The door opened, the equerry stepped inside, and the name he gave as the source of the order shifted the crisis from a seating dispute into a family betrayal. The equerry's answer struck Harry harder than William's departure. The instruction had been presented as a request from the Duke of Sussex himself, a request to seat Meghan in Catherine's place, as proof that the family had accepted them as equals. Harry had asked for no such thing. In one sentence, the evening's hidden strategy became clear. Someone had used his name, Charles's authority, and Meghan's ambition to provoke the exact rupture now unfolding. Harry struck his palm against the table. The sound cut through the room, and his face tightened with fury and humiliation. The false request had traveled through a junior liaison attached to his temporary palace arrangements, an official assigned to carry messages between visiting royals and the household. Because the instruction came through that channel, staff believed the Duke had personally demanded the change. That appearance mattered because it turned a secret alteration into what looked like a direct challenge to William and Catherine. The damage spread immediately. Charles delayed the royal toast, while foreign guests were quietly moved into small conversation groups. Senior aides entered the banquet hall and began collecting printed seating records before more copies could leave the palace. The king understood the danger. If the amended plan reached the press before the truth was established, the monarchy would appear divided by a public demand Harry had never made. Harry demanded to know who believed they could speak in his name. Meghan felt manipulated too, but her anger shifted when her husband asked why she had not questioned being offered Catherine's exact place. She stared at him, as though the question itself were a betrayal. The Duchess insisted she had been told the seat represented a new agreement, yet the Duke reminded her that no agreement could erase another person's name beneath a menu. Catherine remained composed when an aide offered to arrange a different chair. She turned away before the sentence was finished. The princess would not return under revised terms, because accepting another place would make the original insult seem negotiable. William stood beside her near the palace exit, ready to leave if the truth was buried beneath ceremony again. Charles acted with sudden force. He suspended Camilla's deputy private secretary and the Sussex liaison pending an internal inquiry, a formal palace investigation used to establish who gave an order and whether authority was abused. The Queen Consort said little, but she knew her office would carry the blame for allowing the message to pass without direct confirmation. The final document made the betrayal worse. The liaison had acted after receiving a private written message from Meghan's personal advisor, claiming that a symbolic seating correction had already been discussed with Harry. He had never seen it. She had never shown it to him. Harry turned toward Meghan and asked for a private conversation with no advisors present. Across the corridor, William waited beside Catherine, one hand resting near the door. For the first time that night, the brothers were no longer confronting each other. They were each waiting for the women beside them to decide what happened next. The turning point came away from the banquet table. In one private room, Harry asked Meghan whether she had known more than she admitted. In another, Catherine asked William not to turn her dignity into a permanent war with his brother. There were no secretaries to soften the language, and no palace process to hide behind. Only two marriages facing the same question. Was loyalty proven by defending a loved one, or by demanding the truth from them? Harry closed the sitting room door and placed the advisor's message between them. His voice remained low, but the hurt behind it was impossible to miss. The written note claimed a more prominent seat had already been discussed with him, creating the impression that he had approved the request. A personal advisor was someone trusted to shape private strategy and public messaging, and that role carried influence even without formal palace authority. He asked Meghan directly whether she had encouraged the attempt to change the seating. Meghan admitted her team had requested a stronger position for her return. She said she wanted the evening to show that years away had not reduced her to an unwanted guest. But the Duchess insisted she never ordered anyone to hide Catherine's name or speak falsely in Harry's name. Her anger broke through when he did not defend her immediately. She felt abandoned at the exact moment she needed loyalty most. Yet the Duke felt betrayed that ambition had been allowed to move faster than caution, especially when one careless request could reopen every wound between the brothers. Catherine reached for William's hand in the corridor before he could call for the car. She told him that walking out had protected her dignity, but leaving forever would allow the person behind the scheme to decide how the night ended. Returning after the truth was acknowledged would not be surrender. It would show that neither humiliation nor anger could control them. William admitted he wanted the palace to feel the consequences of asking her, again and again, to absorb disrespect for the sake of appearances. The prince had watched her turn pain into calm so often that everyone had begun expecting it. Catherine answered with quiet resolve. She would re-enter only if Meghan personally left the chair and the original seating arrangement was restored without alteration. Meghan made the decision moments later. She stood, lifted Catherine's place card from beneath the menu, and carried it openly into the smaller chamber. Before Charles, she admitted through a direct recorded account taken by the King's secretary that she should have moved the moment William identified the seat. The monarch listened without interrupting. William agreed to return, but only after Charles approved a new condition. No future reconciliation measure could alter another royal's ceremonial place without written consent and direct confirmation. Minutes later, the doors reopened, not for a performance of unity, but for a carefully chosen act of accountability that the entire room would witness. By midnight, the world no longer cared about the menu, the speeches, or the visiting delegation. One photograph defined the entire evening: William walking back into the banquet beside Catherine as an attendant restored her place card to the seat Meghan had vacated. Behind them, Harry entered alone. The image carried no official explanation, yet every expression seemed to reveal that the monarchy had survived the crisis only by refusing to conceal it. Catherine returned to her assigned place beside William, and the room seemed to breathe again. Harry took his original seat farther down the table, carrying the silence of the private conversation he had just left. Meghan chose not to re-enter. That decision mattered, because a state banquet was meant to show order before the world, and every empty chair now carried its own meaning. One represented protest, another represented consequence. Charles rose for the delayed toast with a slight tremor in his hand. The king knew the ceremony no longer displayed effortless unity, it displayed survival. A royal toast was the formal moment when the monarch addressed honored guests and affirmed the purpose of the evening. But his words now landed differently. He spoke of duty, trust, and the strength required to correct a wrong. William watched him closely. Catherine remained still. Harry lowered his eyes. Morning turned the private crisis into a public reckoning. One newspaper placed the returning couple across its front page, beneath the headline, "The Chair That Divided the Palace." The photograph showed the prince beside his wife as her name was restored, while the Duke followed alone behind them. The image became more powerful than any palace statement because it captured both repair and loss in a single moment. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace before noon. One woman near the gates lifted a handwritten sign reading, "Dignity has a place." Others repeated the phrase, transforming Catherine's restored seat into a symbol of public support. A national broadcaster described William's walkout not as an abandonment of duty, but as a refusal to let ceremonial reconciliation come at his wife's expense. Meghan's responsibility divided opinion. Some blamed her for remaining seated after the truth became clear. Others argued she had been used by a palace system built on whispered messages and unchecked assumptions. The strongest criticism soon shifted toward the chain of offices that allowed false instructions to pass without direct confirmation. Charles responded before the day ended. He ordered that no future change involving the ceremonial positions of living royals could be approved verbally. Written authorization and direct confirmation would become mandatory. The monarch had finally turned embarrassment into reform. William prepared to leave with Catherine when a final message arrived. His father wanted one last meeting, not to discuss punishment, but to decide what the crown must learn from the night. In that final meeting, the king would give the walkout its permanent meaning, and decide whose dignity the crown could never again ask to be sacrificed. The final verdict was delivered after the guests had gone, and the banquet hall stood empty. Charles faced William and Catherine beside the table where the crisis had begun. No applause remained to influence him. No cameras waited for a polished answer. The king admitted that his desire to display family unity had created space for manipulation. William's walkout had embarrassed the palace, but the deception behind Catherine's stolen seat had endangered something far greater. Charles returned to the abandoned table and lifted the concealed place card from beneath the menu. He placed it carefully in front of Catherine's chair, restoring more than a name. Ceremonial precedence was the formal order that protected each royal's position during official events, and the monarch now understood why it could never be treated as a private bargaining tool. Reconciliation could not be built by quietly reducing one person to elevate another. Equality forced through deception was not peace. It was humiliation dressed as unity. William spoke without anger. The prince told his father that he had not walked out to punish Meghan or embarrass the crown. He left because remaining seated would have made Catherine's dignity appear negotiable. His silence would have told every palace office that her place could be altered whenever the family needed a convenient image. Charles listened without defending himself, because he knew the future king was right. Catherine accepted Meghan's apology, but she refused to let forgiveness erase responsibility. She told Charles that her restraint had too often been used as a shield against conflict. Each time she remained calm, the palace assumed she could carry one more insult without consequence. The princess would still protect the monarchy, but she would no longer protect decisions that diminished her in its name. Harry later confirmed through a documented statement to the household secretary that the advisor behind the symbolic seating correction would have no further role in communication with the royal family. Meghan also accepted responsibility in a recorded account for remaining in the chair after William identified it. She had been misled about the authority behind the arrangement, but she admitted that confusion no longer excused her once the truth was spoken. Charles signed a permanent written protocol before the night ended. No ceremonial position involving a living royal could be changed through verbal messages, private negotiations, or assumed approval. Every alteration would require written authorization and direct confirmation. William left the palace beside Catherine without triumph. He felt only relief that one painful refusal had finally forced the family to separate peace from pretense. The crown survived because someone stood, when remaining seated, would have turned disrespect into precedent. William's empty chair had shocked the palace, but Catherine's restored place delivered the final verdict. Unity without dignity was never unity at all. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.